What's good? It's Woog. Please like and subscribe. We're in the wake of the PBC on Fox doubleheader featuring the Charlo brothers, Jermell and Jermall. Jermell at 154 versus Tony Harrison and Jermall Charlo at 160 fighting last-minute replacement Korobov, who hasn't been in the ring in a while. And what a disastrous night for both Charlos. They've been trying to drum up more and more interest in their career and trying to land bigger and bigger fights. You got one of them calling out Jarrett Hurd at 154. You got the other calling out Golovkin and Canelo at 160. And a night like that was the last thing they needed to get the fights that they want. You start off with Tony Harrison, who's only lost a couple of times, one to Jarrett Hurd and another to Willie Nelson, outboxing Jermell Charlo in a very close fight. This one could have gone either way, actually. I had Tony Harrison looking really good through the first six. I had him winning maybe a couple of the last 6 rounds, but I actually thought that Jermell might have edged out that decision against Tony Harrison. And you would think that with a Charlo card, that the judges and just the powers that be would have more incentive in giving Jermell Charlo a close decision than the other way around, but he didn't get the decision. They gave Tony Harrison the win, and Tony Harrison walks away with that 154-pound title, and that kind of ruins the super fight plans between Jarrett Hurd and Jermell Charlo now that Jermell Charlo doesn't have a belt. His output was higher than we've seen in recent fights from Jermell Charlo. I mean, he's been a pretty good boxer, very quick hands, a lot of power. You've seen him just knock Erickson Lubin out, but he's won a lot of his fights, most of his fights by decision against Vanes Martirosyan versus Austin Trout. But it just looked like Harrison was a slightly more skilled technical fighter. This was definitely a possibility, but you thought that the pressure that Jermell Charlo could apply, coupled with his power, would eventually overwhelm Tony Harrison. And the fact that Jermell Charlo has a slightly higher output than Tony Harrison would net him some more of those slower rounds where you would give it to Charlo, because it just seemed like he threw more punches, and if they landed nearly about the same amount of punches, that Charlo's output would win the day. That didn't happen, and so he's gonna have to win a couple fights to be back into contention for a title fight at 154. He's not far away from doing so, and it was a competitive fight, but make no mistake, this was a setback for Jermell Charlo at 154. Next up was Jermall Charlo defending his 160-pound title versus last-minute replacement Korobov. The original fighter tested positive for PED, so they scrapped that fight. And Korobov was a southpaw, and I don't know if it was that Jermall Charlo hadn't prepared for a southpaw like Korobov, but man, Korobov was just picking him apart with straight lead left hands. He didn't even always have to set it up with the right jab. Sometimes he would just get in position, get his feet in position to deliver a left hand, and his timing was doing a lot to throw Charlo off. Charlo's a pretty conventional fighter. He's a high output fighter. He stays pretty upright. He throws hard punches, and he's got fast enough hands to get them off and to make them connect. But damn, he did not have an answer for Korobov's left hand through the first 6 rounds. He made adjustments, and Korobov was supposed to be fighting on the undercard of this card, so he was prepared to fight, but he wasn't prepared to go 12 rounds, and he definitely wasn't preparing to go 12 rounds with Jermall Charlo, somebody of that caliber. So I anticipated that he would wane in the later rounds because of his under-preparation and because he had been inactive for so many years. But damn, he exceeded all expectations. He was trashing Charlo, just dominating Charlo through much of those first 6 rounds. Charlo won most of the last 6 rounds and actually badly hurt Korobov in the last round, so he did enough to kind of even out the fight. I still had Korobov winning an easy decision, maybe 8 rounds to 4, maybe 7 rounds to 5. I could maybe justify a 6-6 draw, maybe. That is a stretch. I don't see Korobov not winning this fight. But the judges somehow had Jermall Charlo winning the fight, and one judge had it like 118 to 111, which is just unfathomable. That judge was actually Larry Hazard Jr., who is the son of the broadcast unofficial judge Larry Hazard Sr., who just misjudged both of these fights so bad. He had them so heavily Charlo'd. You would see Charlo just get devastated one round after another. And then Larry Hazard Sr. would give both those rounds to Charlo. It was crazy. And you almost wonder, like, what fight was he watching? I just don't see how he could be viewed as a credible, unofficial or official judge, nor could his son, Larry Hazard Jr., be considered a credible judge after the way that he judged this Jermall Charlo Korobov fight. That was just a travesty. It's almost cliche to say because we see it so often, but that is everything that's wrong with boxing. Horrible judging that favors the favorite, the home team, so to speak, so poorly, where you just walk away from the fight scratching your head, and it just leaves a nasty feeling in your soul when you see a fighter like Korobov have such a great performance and then get that type of treatment on the scorecards. There's just no excuse for it. So Charlo, Jermall Charlo, the 160-pound middleweight fighter, did come away with the victory, although I don't feel it was deserved by any stretch. This still paints a big question mark over his path forward. Since he was exposed, granted, the other killers at middleweight aren't lefties the way Korobov is. Korobov is actually in the mix, in my opinion, in a lot of these matchups going forward. If he does get a big fight going forward, I think that he's a live underdog against just about anybody because of how slick of a southpaw he is and how well he gets that left hand across. Not saying that he beats Golovkin, not saying that he beats Canelo, but he's a dog in the fight. Or against Derevyanchenko, against Danny Jacobs, I give him at least a shot against any of them. But Jermall Charlo, who I did want to see fight Canelo Alvarez, Gennady Golovkin, I actually thought that he was going to be a tough matchup for Golovkin because Golovkin is on the back end of the age of 30. He's like 36, 37 now. And Charlo is still young enough to where a lot of that youthful energy and that output and that snappiness, that all of those things that you're equipped with when you're still young, would have made it tough for Golovkin to pull it out. I do not think that anymore because I think that Charlo is less of a boxer than I thought he was. Even though he beat Austin Trout when he was still at 154, where his brother Jermell Charlo still resides, he beat Austin Trout by decision, and he's beaten a couple other good fighters too. I just think he needs to shore up a lot of the holes in his game. He's kind of predictable in terms of his output. You know what's coming. It's 1-2, 1-1-2, 1-2. The 1 being the jab, the 2 being the straight right, and then he'll mix in a left hook every now and then, maybe throw an uppercut every now and then. But his timing and his pacing and the way that he frames his punches are too predictable to get across against the top fighters. I just see Canelo being way more snappy with his punches and just putting his combinations together way better, and he frames his punches better. You'll see Canelo go to the body, and then dip his head and then go high and just set the opponent up for devastating power shots because of the way that he's framing his punches and a lot of his misdirection. I just see that as being too much for Jermall Charlo to handle at this point. So yeah, the Charlo brothers have to get back in the gym, work on those deficiencies in their game, and then assess the path forward. Luckily for Jermall Charlo, he doesn't have an L on his record. And Jermell Charlo, he's going to have to win another fight or two if he wants to fight Jarrett Hurd. And Jarrett Hurd is not an untouchable fighter. He gets hit a lot. His defense is basically his pressure. Everybody that he's going against has slightly quicker hands, is connecting at a higher percentage in the first couple of rounds, but he just walks them down and then thumps them with his power shots, and it eventually overwhelms and devastates his opponent. Now, it looks like Jarrett Hurd has plans to go to 160, so I don't even think that Jermell Charlo has enough time to recover from that decision loss against Tony Harrison to be able to put a fight together with Jarrett Hurd. I think that ship might have sailed, and Jarrett Hurd in the post-fight interview said about as much, like, hey, the interest just isn't there, and you just ruined your super fight by losing to Tony Harrison. So Jarrett Hurd looks like he could be going to 160, which that's going to be a tough, tall glass for him to handle too, because although he's a really big 154, I don't know if his punching power will be as devastating at 160. And again, he gets hit a lot, and getting hit at 154 is not the same as getting hit at 160 versus Golovkin, Canelo, Danny Jacobs, Derevyanchenko, you name it. They've got some really hard hitters at 160, and I think that Jarrett Hurd is going to have to shore up some of his defense before he could really be a viable contender at 160. So we'll see what's next for the Charlos, but yeah, that night did not go the way that they planned. Not at all. So thanks again for tuning in. Drop your comments in the comment section if you want to weigh in on the Charlos, on Jarrett Hurd, on the 154 or 160 pound divisions. It's Woog. Thanks for tuning in.